to start talking. So there we go. So welcome. Like I said, I am Rebecca Stekloff. I am a graduate from the class of 1998. I know this is about career pivots. I am one of those degree pivoters. I graduated with an MPPM and now it says MBA on my LinkedIn and resume. I had a career in marketing, then about a decade where I stayed home with our kids. And now for the past 8 years, I've been working back at Yale in the School of Management's Career Development Office. So it's great. I love my job, and it's a great way to have a perspective as both an alum and someone on staff. And I'm really glad I was asked to moderate this panel, who are full of other fantastic alum. So I'm excited to hear their stories and share with you. And again, the topic of this is all about career pivoting and charting paths in leadership for both business and society. The way this panel is going to operate is I will allow each of our alum panelists to introduce themselves, and then they each have one question unique to them that they will talk about. If you have any questions, that's gold. That's what we want to get to. So please submit any questions using the Q&A feature, probably at the bottom of your screen. When you do, please identify your degree and class year also. So that'll help us all just resonate with each other better. I think that's it on my part. Sorry, I'm just looking through my notes here. I think that's it. Just so you all know too, this event is being recorded and will be available in a couple of business days afterwards for you to share with everybody. But to get us started, I am introducing our alums based upon how long they've been an alum. So Jill, you get to go first.
Okay, I get the most gray hair. Okay.
No, it's alumni status.
I don't well, Brian and I may be competing. Anyway, so I, in thinking about this and the theme of pivots, and looking back on my career, I've had a number of pretty significant pivots. And in the beginning, it was really pivoting and learning about myself that I really wasn't a big company person. So I went from industry. I was first a software engineer before coming to Yale, and then I was an investment banker right after SOM. And I was like, big companies just aren't for me. I'm too entrepreneurial. I like to do my own thing. I like to really think about that. You know, it was just not a good fit. So my first pivot was deciding to be an entrepreneur. And I stayed in the world of being both an entrepreneur and an intrapreneur, meaning I not only started and grew 3 different businesses, 2 consumer products and 1 software/consulting firm. I also did, once I had children, I pivoted to being an intrapreneur, where I helped other companies start new divisions. You know, helped Ernst & Young start a data warehousing division. I helped another company start an e-commerce division, etc. So, and then my next pivot was going into being a social justice or a social value entrepreneur. And that's when I started doing Imagine LA, where we're really working on figuring out how to help families come in and come out of homelessness and poverty, the long journey to get actually out of poverty. And I stayed there and built that. And then my pivot that I've just made is that I feel like I'm coming full circle. I'm coming back and I'm doing being a software engineer again, and really building a company that is called Social Benefit Navigator, or it's called Social Benefit, and we're building the Social Benefit Navigator that helps people in need navigate our extremely complex public benefit system and tax benefit system. So, you know, it's sort of a full circle. So lots of pivots, But what's the theme? Was this happenstance? Did it, just happen? And I think when I really think about that, underlying all of this, for me, was a passion for a couple of issues. One is women's issues. I went to Smith College. One is poverty, and the other is homelessness. And I wrote my senior thesis on the effects of the Reagan budget cuts on low-income female heads of household. And I worked at my, advocation throughout until I started running Imagine LA, and leading that effort was all of my advocation was really around those issues, and they all came together with the issue of family homelessness. As you all may or may not know, family homelessness primarily is headed by female heads of household. So it's all of that. And so I would say it's not happenstance, because underlying everything has been this, and my pivot to Imagine LA was really about going from it being my avocation to it being my vocation. And so there's my pivots. And I look forward to questions and hearing maybe about some of yours. Thanks.
That's perfect. Thank you. And I realized I did not highlight what the special unique question was that people were tasked with. So Jill's was about our pivots about, are they intentional by happenstance? And you guys all just heard that it was more intentional about recognizing that this avocation really could be a vocation and where to go with it. So, which is great. Thank you. I like that line a lot too. Thank you. That's why I just quoted it. Okay, Brian, you are up next.
Yes.
And Brian has had a significant pivot. And so we'll actually walk us through all that, but also talk about how to prepare for yourself as you are embarking on this. So
sure. So I'm Brian Roach. I have an MPPM from 93. I had about an 18-year career in banking, and today I'm an emergency department nurse at Yale New Haven Hospital, and I'm in the nurse practitioner program here at the Yale School of Nursing. And in about a year, I'll be licensed as a family nurse practitioner. For me, it was a 10-year sort of process. It wasn't necessarily a pivot. It was a series of events, some of them good, some of them bad, that got me to where I am today. But how I always knew from a long time ago that I always talked about a second career, and I always thought that my second career was going to be outdoors and something not at a desk. And part of this 10-year process, I explored sort of outdoor careers. And even a few years ago, I spent the entire summer on the trails in the Grand Canyon as a sort of like a volunteer in like emergency services in the Grand Canyon. And that led to a sort of series of events where I became an EMT, where I went to sort of, and then went to nursing school at Duke a few years ago. And the next thing you know, I'm here working in the emergency department. But it was a series of events, but there was sort of definitely a dark period where sort of like, where I didn't have a job in banking anymore, and it wasn't really expected, and it just happened. And I'd always had this idea. I knew that I was going to have a second career. I didn't know about the timing and how it was going to happen. But I think in order for all this process to happen, I think I was preparing a long time ago financially for my second career, knowing that my next career was probably not going to pay me as well as my first. But to be sort of, being physically healthy and also mentally healthy, and having the right sort of support system in place, and removing sort of toxic parts of your life was an important part of this whole process and how it all happened. Because it's much easier to make these transitions if you're mentally well and you're physically well, and you're very optimistic about the future in terms of your health, and that you expect to live a long life, and you have a lot more to do. And that's the way I sort of felt. And so, going to nursing school as a full-time student down at Duke as a 55-year-old really wasn't that bad, because I was definitely ready for the challenge, and it really wasn't that bad. So that's what I would say. It's a lot about sort of self-care to make this sort of transition. And it definitely was not a pivot. It was a whole bunch of steps.
Thank you. It's remarkable, the different changes, and how do you how do you make change when things are thrust upon you a bit in a surprise way, but also knowing that maybe the surprise is more the timing because you had set yourself up all along for this future that was just when was it going to come. So thank you for sharing. Becca, you are up next.
Hi.
So yes, and Becca's going to talk, well, you can talk about all about your history too, but also about really also like living the mission of the school and advocating for business and society, and how does that perspective cut across when you're playing in different sectors. So.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. So the history of my career has been all really, motivated by a desire for social impact and by an early sort of childhood formative experiences, being the child of immigrants and moving back to China with my family and realizing, wow, if I had been born here, all of my opportunities would have been different. So really realizing that the lottery of life shouldn't determine our outcomes, but in many ways it does, and feeling how deeply unfair that was. So in going to Yale, I actually did a joint degree with Princeton with got an MPA. And so like many folks that I met at Yale, but perhaps uniquely so as a joint degree, I had a lot of existential crises upon graduating and not really knowing, how do I want to utilize my skills, knowing my commitment to service, and which sector should I go into? So prior to SOM, I had been in global development in the field. So I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Kazakhstan. I worked in Central Asia at a large international NGO. And then after SOM, I did what a lot of people do, and I went into consulting. But I went into social sector consulting. So my clients were mostly large philanthropies and, socially driven organizations. And then I moved from that to operations, running global operations for a fast-growing social enterprise global NGO called ID Insight that does data and evidence to further impact for global development practitioners. That was my last role. I actually was there for 6 years and grew that organization from around 40 people to over 200. And so that was an incredible lesson in not only transitioning to the nonprofit sector, but really transitioning to what Jill described as like being an entrepreneur and being in that startup culture, a very, very different culture. And something that I loved, that I realized I really, really enjoyed being part of building something. And one note in that pivot from consulting to operations and from a private firm to a nonprofit is just realizing that the role that I occupied in operations was a much better fit for my strengths than the consulting role. So when I became a consultant, I quickly realized that one of my primary strengths is in execution. I am a details person. I like to engage strategically in strategic thinking, but I really enjoy operationalizing that strategic thinking. So seeing something appear from nothing and having it be something that I built with my team is incredibly rewarding to me. And that is actually the opposite of what you experience in consulting. Consulting, and this is no bash on consultants, because I think there are some people for whom that intellectual process of being an advisor is incredibly rewarding. It was just really important for me to understand that it wasn't a good use of my strengths. I would give these PowerPoint decks to my clients. I would develop these really cool strategies. The stuff that they were working on was truly very impactful and very interesting. But what I was missing was the execution. I would then disappear, like, okay, here's this deck, bye, and never be a part of actually implementing those great ideas that we had talked about. So I think, there are different ways that you can think about your strengths and skill sets. And my advice would be to really deeply introspect and think about what gets you in your flow state, what kind of work is really fun for you, and doesn't feel like work and feels really rewarding. And hopefully that also aligns with what you're quite good at or can become better at by utilizing those strengths, and start to do your career pivots towards those things that you have strengths in. So that was my first big pivot, was from consulting to operations. And it was such an excellent pivot for me. It was just such a better use of my skills and my passions. And then the second big pivot that I did just last year was I left that executive role. I became the COO of that organization, ID Insight. And I left that really wonderful, in many ways, dream job to take another dream job and answer the call to service to join the Biden administration. So I'm now the regional director for Europe, Mediterranean, and Asia at the Peace Corps, which is an executive role in the Peace Corps, running one of the Peace Corps' 3 big geographical regions. And my region spans 3 continents. There's 800 staff across the region, across 19 countries. And it's really interesting being in government, essentially for the first time since I was a Peace Corps volunteer, which doesn't really count. I'm now in headquarters in a big Washington office, dealing with a very geographically dispersed team, but being in government with all of the things that learning about the stakeholders of government requires, like Congress and the White House, and learning interagency, communications, and being essentially a public diplomat, right? I go to the different countries, I meet with the ministers about our programs and projects in the Peace Corps. So really just a dream job in that it's full circle. This is an agency that means so much to me because I served as a volunteer, and that was my first job in global development. And in many ways, one of the jobs I also loved most was being a volunteer and being on the ground and doing grassroots level NGO work. What I can say about this government pivot is that I was really scared before I did it. I have 2 young kids. My son turns 5 today, and my daughter is almost 2. So I wondered if it was the right time for me to make a major career pivot. Some of us have talked about our kids. Like, it's a really big thing that a lot of times people don't talk openly about, but you obviously need to balance the needs of your family and your ambitions for your career. And I was scared when I made this pivot that, I'd never been in government before. So what would this pivot do? Would I suddenly be thrown into a viper's nest or some kind of lion's den that I didn't understand? Would it be really difficult for me to pick up what to do? And I guess what I would say is that it was surprisingly consistent. The leadership characteristics that are required to operate whatever sector you are in. So yes. All of the leadership skills that I had at my executive role in a nonprofit transferred pretty much completely to the executive role that I have now in government. It is the same skills. And those skills are really excellent communication, the ability to strategically manage limited resources, happens in every sector, public, private, or nonprofit, and just being an empathetic and inclusive leader, making people feel heard, and also knowing when to give them important feedback that they need to hear. So knowing your people, getting to know their strengths, utilizing their strengths for the collective mission, motivating them to, achieve whatever goal it is that you're setting out to achieve, and being able to deal with tough performance management issues and have those hard conversations in a way that is empathetic and thoughtful. Those skills carried over completely regardless of sector. And so that was comforting, to enter this role and realize, okay, this is about being an executive, something that I have done before. And it's a bigger team now, it's more dispersed. There are all of these other stakeholders, but those are just details relative to the main, skill sets that are required to do well in this job. You're on mute, Rebecca.
Yes, thank you. I am on mute because my email keeps chiming. And so I apologize if you all are hearing that. And I appreciate everything you just shared. And it's making me kind of reflect. And I'm going to pause there because we've had our participant numbers increase. And I just wanted to say welcome to everybody. And also, we want to hear from you and get your questions. So you can submit them via the Q&A feature, which is, I think, probably at the bottom or right-hand side of your screen, depending upon how you have your Zoom set up right now. But so please submit your questions now. Now I'll go back to what's been I've been mulling as I'm hearing everybody's story here. And Becca, you're talking about actually the similarities across, regardless of the sectors, what you really need. And Jill was talking about a through line of her story, and Brian was talking about it wasn't really a pivot, it was more these series of events that have occurred over a decade. That has me even questioning, what do we mean by career pivot? And like, what does that actually mean? Does that just mean taking a new job? Because with that will always come change. Or does it mean wholesaling, changing everything that we're doing, which then requires possibly rethinking your own personal resources, not just how your lifestyle and life stage is set up, but also your knowledge base and skills and training required. I'm curious to know what you think. What do we think we even mean when we say career pivot? And do they, and does it exist really? And where does it exist? And then, I mean, I could get all very like deep on this, and like then how do we prepare? But I'm just curious if you guys have a thought on that. So I think about it a lot in our role in the career development office, because many people come to business school specifically to almost restart and refresh, kind of like what Brian's doing now. He went back to school to restart and refresh in a new place. So we see it a lot, but when I think about it from an alum basis, I'm curious. Jill, go for it. Your hand went up first.
I don't know. I would just say, I consider when I'm thinking about these pivots, and I even, and listening to Brian and Becca, is I feel like it's taking what you have and changing your point of view. Like you've got I got all these great software engineering school skills, and I wanted to not just do that. I wanted to use those skills to look at other problems, to look at other industries, to look, and, and along the way, I feel like you're gathering what you care about and what you do, like what's working for you. I loved how Becca said, I discovered I'm an operational person, right? Like I discovered that. Like along the way, I discovered that I'm a visionary and that I am the person that lines up the troops and gets everybody going. And that I love the detail enough to make sure that there's structure in place for people to operationalize, right? Like, so, but I think, at least for me, the exciting part of all my pivots was sort of taking on a new problem or taking on a new challenge with what I had, but with an open mind that I was going to learn a whole lot more. Like, and just and bring what I had, but with a sort of a humbleness. Like, okay, I have some basic skills. I know I can kind of navigate this. Like Becca was saying, I don't know about this government thing, but I'm okay. I'm gonna give it a go, and then seeing what the point of view and how you grow it, and how you keep growing, but solving a new challenge, a new problem, a new this. I love Brian going out saying, I want to be outside. And then, like how that point of view just kept morphing, given your desires and, what you learned about yourself.
Brian, Becca, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I never, until you invited me to this, I'd never really heard of the word career pivot. I've met a lot of people that are in second careers, and they say, oh, I've met nurses that became, they're second career nurses that did something else. And so I've heard the term second careers, and it comes up quite often. But a pivot is something new to me. And and this is actually something I was going to say for the end, but one thing the people that I've met who have done second careers, one thing they all say, should have done it sooner. They always say that. Should have done it sooner. I don't know why I waited so long. Should have done it sooner.
Yeah, I'm just the moderator. You guys are all the panelists here, but it is one thing I've thought about, because I remember when I was, actually, I think it was when I was interviewed for the job here in the career development office, that someone was asking me about what did I think about going from my private sector work where I did brand management and advertising, and so all marketing and private sector, to working for, education and nonprofit. And I remember looking at them like, I don't think it's any different. Like, I'm still helping everybody do marketing. Like, that's
No, you're exactly right. Because I would go to be in nursing school or be in the hospital, and they would say, "What'd you do before?" And I'd say, "Well, I was a banker. I was an investment banker." And they go, "Wow, that must be a big change." And I'm like, "No, it's just a bunch of people and problems, and you're solving problems. And it's no different whether you're in the hospital and with sick people or people that got some sort of a transactional problem, or we're trying to help them get more rich, or whatever. But it's just people and problems and dealing with people."
Yeah.
And
I wonder if
SOM
that kind of-
definitely, and SOM, prepared me for that.
Yeah. I wonder if that kind of gets to what Jill was talking about that theme, that through line, you were phrasing it as the avocation becoming vocation, but still just like, what's that inspires you, that keeps you going, that everything kind of makes sense. Maybe that's why you never even thought about a pivot before, because it all made sense. It's just, how do we frame that? So we do have a question from the audience. Thank you very much. I will let any one of you take a stab at this first. Can you talk more about what the discovery process looked like? Was there an aha moment or an intentional exploration that led you to the next step in your career progression? Thank you. Great question.
Well, when I was in the Grand Canyon, I thought I was going to become a park ranger. And so one of the requirements to become a park ranger is I had to go to EMT school. And I was in EMT school for one day. And someone says, "Oh, well, you can be a nurse in a year." And I was like, "What?" And I had no idea that you can be an RN. It only takes a year. If you already have a bachelor's degree, it takes a year. And I was like, "Oh." And like that night, I was like, figuring out what I needed to do in order to apply to nursing school. But like, it was just like, I had no idea until someone just said it. And I was like, "Oh." And then it was like, I wish I knew that a long time ago, because it was actually, if you do have a bachelor's to become an RN, it takes about a year.
Yeah, this
now
is
you just shared that with everybody now, which is great. Thank you. Sorry, Becca.
Sort of an answer to both your question, Rebecca, and the question we got in the chat about the discovery process. I really think of pivots, as you can tell from my own story, as less about pivoting a sector and more about pivoting your role. So I really encourage people to think about what role they can shine at and what they want to wake up and do every single day. I think early on in my career, I paid a lot more attention to the sector, like the language and the mission statement for an organization or company, and much less to the actual role that I would be doing inside that company. Because you can work for Amnesty International, you could be the janitor, you could be the accountant, you could be the program manager, you could be the HR person. Like, what role are you occupying in that organization? And is it a good match for your natural and chosen strengths? So for me, my first discovery process of my first pivot from consulting to operations was really introspecting about what my strengths are. And there are a lot of tools, some of which I can mention now, that can help you assess what your strengths are. So the first tool is, there are a lot of tests out there, like Strengths Finders, that a lot of people know about, MBTI. There's Crystal Knows, which is an interesting one. Like there's one called Drive. I think there's What Color Is Your Parachute, which is like a classic book that they put out a new edition every single year that like has you take tests about what might you be good at. And Brian, maybe if you took that earlier, it would have told you should be outside more, be on your feet more. It's like things like that just help you. None of them are, I would say, like some kind of silver bullet, but cumulatively, if you want to start exploring some of these tools to assess what natural strengths you bring to roles, it might be able to tell you, hey, like Jill, you are more of an ideation visionary leader, like an excellent communicator. You should be in an executive role doing that vision thing. Becca, you are like an executor. You should be in operations, or you're a people manager. It'll tell some other people like, you're an individual contributor. You don't actually like to manager lead teams. One of my favorite role match lessons was when I was a COO at ID Insight. One of the heads of our departments, who actually ran our technical team, came to me and said, Becca, I'd like to have a sit down meeting with you and discuss a demotion. Like, I would like to revert back to my previous job as an economist. I do not want to lead this team of economists. What makes me happy is writing code. What makes me happy is engaging with the data. What makes me happy is nerding out on that stuff. What makes me unhappy is leading a team of a bunch of people with their problems. I don't know how you do that. I really don't like it. Can you please get me out of this right away? And it was so brave and such an authentic conversation. It really opened up my eyes to, like, not everyone needs to be a manager. Not everyone needs to be a supervisor. Not even everyone needs to climb the corporate ladder or the rungs of quote unquote responsibility or salary in the same way. Some people can be extremely excellent individual contributors, or even have very lucrative jobs, right? Like software engineers at Google can make more than their supervisors because they're excellent at their job. So it's just about finding the role that suits you. And I think some of those tools are useful. A second thing that is very useful is introspection within yourself and also with others. How others who know you well help you to introspect. And what I mean by that is you need feedback. That was one of the best things I learned at Yale by taking the interpersonal dynamics course. Was they have this phrase, it takes two to know one. It takes other people observing you and sharing their observations with you for you to really deeply understand yourself and how you show up in this world. So when it comes to introspecting about yourself, think about the times when you've been most happy in a job or a task. That might have been like in college when you were running your student a cappella group, or whatever it was, that made you just really feel like this is a type of task or type of work that I really enjoy. And then think about the opposite. What are times when you just couldn't wait for a project to be over because the work that you were doing was such drudgery to you, or just did not match your, strengths and needs? And then do the same thing, but ask other people. Ask family members, friends, coworkers, former supervisors, current supervisors. Hey, what am I shining at? And what are things that, are tasks that you would like give to other people because they're not like that well suited to me? And use all of that information to basically job hack your way into something, either make your current job more like the job that you want, which is something Amy Resnesky, love her, says a lot and talk to us about in our careers class, but also, find different jobs. Like, you need to know when to leave your job because you have stopped growing, or you're no longer getting that match between the strengths or the skills that you want to develop and the skills that the job has you doing.
Thank you. And I know that wasn't actually a pitch for the CDO. I know you really believe that, but for a lot out there who are now inspired by Becca, you just so you know, we offer lifelong services in the Career Development Office, and you can always meet with a coach to start this process of self-reflection or figuring out what tools are out there that would work for you. I do recall my first meeting. So this would have been back in 1996 with Mark Case. He was in charge of the CDO then, if anybody remembers that name, and him asking me about, to Becca's point, like, what did you like about your old job? It wasn't about where do I want to go, because I literally had no idea what I wanted to do. And he just kept probing me on what did I like, what didn't I like, and it was whether it was from an outcomes base or a task base that it was the first time I had ever thought about things that way. So he put me on a good path. So it was good to also have some sort of outsider perspective as well. But on that topic then, where are the stumbling blocks? That's my question for everybody. Whether it is, so now you know where you want to go and it's time to make a change, however we want to frame that. Are the stumbling blocks in convincing somebody else, whether it's a recruiter or an investor or, an admissions school, like that this is right for me? Are the stumbling blocks more setting yourself up, your personal life up, to allow yourself to make these changes? And there's other, are the stumbling blocks actually being able to clarify in a succinct story what it is that you want to do and why. I'm curious to know, as we all collectively, and you three as our panelists, have done a number of changes throughout, what have you learned about where are the challenges and actually moving forth with a change? I'm tempted to call on Jill first because you've had both the working for in-house, and then as an entrepreneur, how do you get investors and how do you start? Also the entrepreneurship of how do you get clients and talk to, like, there were a lot of, you have a lot of external stakeholders that you've probably had to go through, and the shift with them as your personal life morphed and changed. But I don't actually believe in cold calling, so I'm not making Jill go first.
Oh, I think something that I've learned about myself, that there's certain things that don't feel like risks to me, and then there's other things that definitely feel like risks. And I think if you're an entrepreneur by nature, which I have discovered that just plain is who, like profile, is you don't perceive a lot of risk in certain areas. You just sort of, you're identifying a gap, you're identifying a place that you think you can create value, and you figure out how to articulate it, and you pretty quickly get positive or negative feedback. At least that's what's happened for me, is I get an idea, I do, some market research, I do, and I, do a couple of, what I would call focus groups in a more broad way. And then if it looks good, I'm like, okay, I'm going to go. And so I think that's one thing, is just, and this is an entrepreneur, it's doing your homework. And do you have, like, if you put the right people around, I love what Becca was saying, is you got to have a good reflection going on around you. Because I've had people say, Jill, I think this is a really good idea, but I'm not sure that you have the core skill sets that's gonna, I think unless you can find a couple of partners and with these core skill sets that are on, I'm not sure that I think you may have too much risk going on. And I'm like, I hear them, I'm super open to that. So that happens. So that's one thing. So, and I just think, we learned at SOM, and you've learned in your careers, how to do market assessments, how to do risk analysis. We know, so make sure that you're not just being driven by your passion, but actually do some analysis and get some feedback and do that. So that's, don't get where your heart becomes your brain. We are all, if you went to SOM, you've got major brains, you've got major training, you know how to do an analysis. So do it. Assess yourself, assess the situation. If you don't understand, get the right people to answer the questions that you don't know how to answer. So that's one piece. The other piece, if we're really talking about the and society piece, I loved how Brian said, I had a sixth sense being a banker I was hearing, to squirrel away money so that I might not need so much later. I'm reading between the lines. The economics of all of this is just plain real. So, when I did my entrepreneurials, before I made the leap, I raised the money. I mean, I don't come from wealth. That's not, my second business when I sold it was the money that we used for a down payment for a house. And at the time when I made the pivot to Imagine LA and to do that and to making significantly less, my husband was like on board and, and was doing, better in his career, and we could sort of figure out how to scale back and all of that. But if I hadn't have had that, I couldn't have done it. And if I had, so I think there's one, this whole sort of business, whether or not, it doesn't matter if it's private, nonprofit, for in government, there's this whole, like analysis of where you're going and whether you have the right skill sets, and it's a good opportunity. But then you've got to be realistic about the money. Otherwise, you could find yourself a year in and go, what was I thinking? And just, yeah. So I'm sorry, that might have been too long of an answer, but that in terms of my pivots, those are the things that I've learned over the years. So.
For me, in terms of stumbling blocks, I think the biggest stumbling block is the support system. I think when the support system was good, I felt like I could do anything. And when the support system wasn't very good, it really affected, my confidence in this change. But if you surround yourself with supportive people and get rid of the people who aren't helping, the change isn't that bad. And it was one of the reasons why I came back to New Haven, because this is a place that I knew and I felt like I could be successful here.
Love that.
I'm definitely my own worst stumbling block. I'll just say that. Like I think like many people who are highly motivated, ambitious, think a lot about their careers, I just get sucked into this like existential anxiety about what to do next. Pretty much every single one of my pivots has been like my poor husband listening to me day in, day out, night after night, analyzing all the pros, all the cons, making lists, checking them twice, and just being crazy, like being crazy. Like I have enough self-awareness, I think, to know that I experienced that like when I was graduating from SOM, and that same anxiety has plagued some of my other transitions, just because it's a lot, it's a lot to think about, taking that leap. Like if you're somewhere where you're not that happy and you know that you need to make a change, you're anxious about that, that discovery that like what you're doing is not for you. And that's what happened with my first pivot. But with my second pivot, it was a different kind of anxiety, pretty much the exact opposite anxiety, which was that I loved what I was doing so much that I didn't know if leaving was the right decision. And so I had a whole different spiral of anxiety about leaving a dream job to take another dream job. And, it's like, you don't know what's out there. You never know, no matter how much research you do, whether it's going to be something you like, or, you're always assessing on all of the different metrics. Or if you're like me and overly obsessive, you're assessing all the different metrics of like, is my social impact going to go up or down? Is my family life flexibility going to go up or down? Is my team and how well it gels going to go up or down? Is the cultural fit going to go up or down? Like, it's just sort of, you don't have the answers to all of these things. I will say that like, what's useful to get over that is, one, I agree with Brian completely. You need those people that support you and that can shoulder and help you process some of that decision making, even if they tire of your dribbling about it. But to have the patience to work with you through that. And like, I love the pitch for CDO, paid professionals who can shoulder some of your dribbling, and help you think about things strategically. And then the second thing is just like, for me, more information is always better and helps me feel better. So doing research, like a lot of people, I think when they take jobs, it's interesting that we interview for jobs, but we're also interviewing those employers for jobs. That's extremely important. I have now learned that your supervisor in the job that you take is pretty much the make or break. Like everything else can be perfect, but if your supervisor is not a good leader, is not the kind of person who creates a collegial and productive and inclusive environment, then you will probably be unhappy. People don't leave bad jobs, they leave bad supervisors. So what I do now is when I look into different roles or I get approached for different jobs, believe you me, I am looking at who the boss is, doing my research. At the executive level, you can look on Glassdoor and see CEO ratings. At the sub-executive level, you need to find people who have left those jobs or been formally supervised by those people. And you need to find them on LinkedIn and try to get an informational interview with them. Like the most honest people are going to be the people who have left a job and not the people who are currently there. I've heard a lot of party lines from people who are currently employed at an organization where if you ask someone who just left, they'll tell you the truth about, what's going on there. So collecting that information as much as you can, I think is something that can help stave off the feeling of jumping into the unknown.
Thank you. Thank you all. I think all three of you, definitely two of you, touched on the idea of having a strong support system when making these changes, however they are. And the question for Michelle is, tactically, when you think about support and what you really need around what you really needed in your transition, beyond encouragement, what types of support did you find that you really needed?
Well, in addition to encouragement, it's like people who around you who understand what you're trying to do and are not only just encouragement, but are there to listen. People who value, like whether it be at now that I'm in school or where I'm working, people who value what I bring to the table as someone who's not traditional, and that, organizations that value non-traditional team members. So I think there's a lot of aspects, not just, fans behind you supporting you. I think, also people understand that, what you're going through, and when you're having a tough time, they will listen and not try to discourage you from what you're doing, that they appreciate what you're trying to do. And, I definitely had classmates when I was in nursing school who really were my closest friends, were like really liked having someone like me as part of, on their, in their study group, because you just brought something different to the table, and they value that. And it was that was encouraging.
I think what's been useful is people who know the professional landscape of both where you come from and where you're going next, and can give you candid assessments of the opportunities that you might be looking to pivot into. For example, I've been approached about some jobs where I found that talking to friends or mentors really who are even more senior in the industry it allows me to get a perspective. So for example, when I was offered this political appointment within the Peace Corps, I went to the former, Obama appointed Peace Corps director that I serve on a board with and asked him, is this a good opportunity? And he assured me, yes, it is, and was able to really clarify with me in detail, like, this is the org chart of political appointees. This is where you fall. This is a very senior position. This is what the access would be like for you. This is what the exit opportunities would be like for you. Here are what other people who have done this job have gone on to do later. Like, that was all invaluable information. And in fact, before I was even considering going into government, like getting some of those, because it's a very black hole type thing. If you've never served in government, you need to look at, for example, the Plum Book, which is like a book of political appointments, to see what all of the appointments are in every agency. A lot of people don't know that that's a public resource out there. You can Google it and you can download it right now to see what political appointments are in every agency. So just resources like that help you understand the landscape, and also the counterfactuals of like, well, should I take this or should I wait for something else? Another resource along those lines that has been really useful for me is to get to know executive recruiters. I helped run a CEO search during our CEO transition at ID Insight, and worked very closely with a senior executive recruiter in the social impact space. So now when people approach me for jobs, I can go to that recruiter and say, what do you think about this job? Like, what do you know about this organization? Or what do you think about this type of a level for me? Like, is this something that is a once in a lifetime type thing? Or is this, actually something that someone at my current stage of my career could expect to come every once in a while? That's just really valuable information that somebody whose profession is literally placing executives into social impact jobs has a lot of professional knowledge. So I find that it can be really useful to talk to peers, and I have talked to peers. One of my challenges is that not all of my peers are like either in my space or at my, at the same point in their careers. So it's been really helpful for me to actually cultivate both mentors and executive recruiters to talk to about potential pivots.
Gosh, I love both of your responses. I really value mentors. And in fact, part of what Imagine Like created was a mentorship program for every member. So every member of the family gets their own mentor. But when I think about support systems, when you're a CEO, it's kind of a lonely position. You report to the board, and then you have your leadership staff and team, and so there's really not a totally safe space at work, right? So I think of how do I in terms of my support, I find myself looking for safe spaces, whether that's I ended up helping found a CEO circle in a nonprofit, and getting somebody to facilitate it, and it became this just incredible support group for everybody there, because we all had this sort of same trait, and we brought in and then we'd explore different subjects. So building a place professionally that is safe, where you can both learn and be vulnerable, and I found to be incredibly valuable as as a CEO. I also, in terms of sort of family and friends and mentors, I think also, again, them feeling safe, because so often when you're such an external figure, wherever you go, just having a person that's truly loves you and is looking out for you and knows that you're a person that gives 1000% and is like trying to help you look at how can you give back to yourself, how can you make sure that you're not giving too much, like you're being your mental awareness and your wellness is strong, like helps you, be in for the long haul and that sort of thing. And it's kind of interesting is over time, I've realized that my best friends, my go-to people are therapists. They're psychologists, that's their profession. So they're very, very good at not only listening, but asking me probing questions to make sure that I'm okay and that I'm looking at things holistically. So, just over time that has happened. So there you have it. I would say those two things, but safe spaces.
Thank you. Thank you all. It's time for us to wrap up very shortly. I'm looking at the clock now. There have been two other questions in our Q&A that I just want to quickly address before I give all of our panelists here one more minute to share their marvelous thoughts on everything we've talked about here, whatever you feel can be really strong parting words, although you've already shared a lot of gold. The first question was actually about resources provided by the CDO, specifically for entrepreneurship, but I'm going to make it more broadly focused, that truly anybody who's interested in learning about any opportunities and resources for alumni can go to the, I think it's som.yale.edu/alumni and see all sorts of opportunities. Certainly there's a page for careers, but there's a page for others who are looking to connect other ways. There's also SOM Connect, which is launched, which is a way for alumni to connect with alumni across degree programs and across years. So I encourage everybody, if you're not already a member of that, to get on and engage. It's got some really great functionality about ways to connect, whether geographically or by industry. So that really may help any alum out there who has some questions about, now I'm inspired, what do I do next? The other question, though, was for all of our panelists. So that hopefully, since you were all nodding, you're also open to connecting with anybody who is an audience member here, because that was the other question about how to connect. So I would say, again, SOM Connect is a great way to connect with any of these panelists here, or LinkedIn would be another great, easy way to go to. So I think in SOM Connect, you have options to prioritize or preference how you would like to be connected. But absolutely, if anybody's looking for me by any chance, you can also email me. It's my first name dot last name at yale.edu. So you can always do that as well. But with 3 minutes left to go, so any parting words for our alumni audience here?
Sure.
Great.
Take care of your mind and your body. Just go for it. Don't look back. You probably wish you did it sooner. And just go to your reunion, see your old classmates. It's going to feel great. I think I resisted going for about 15 years because I really felt awkward about transitioning to becoming a nurse and all this sort of thing. And I just went to my 30th reunion. It was great. It was great to see everyone. And like, it was all my concerns were ridiculous. It was all internal.
That was great. Anything else to add, or do we all just want to say ditto? So.
I love that. Yeah, my advice is really what I said, deeply introspect and get to know yourself. That is how you can land in the best possible job. Networking also doesn't help. Really don't be shy. And, a resume sent to an inbox in a sky is really never as effective as getting a warm contact using those alumni of Yale and other places. Look for other professional development associations and networks that you can plug in and be a part of. Like I recently became a Council on Foreign Relations term member. That was a cool process, and I'm happy to connect with anyone about it, whoever's interested, because it's people who work in global and foreign affairs, but across all sectors. So a lot of private, public, and nonprofit and government folks in there. And my last piece of advice is definitely remember our negotiation course at Yale. And when you make a pivot, try to set yourself up well, because pivots are an opportunity to set yourself up for potentially a different either type of role, level of responsibility, or sort of salary tier. And so make sure you know what you're offering. When I transitioned to ID Insight from consulting, I actually took a pretty massive pay cut, which was intentional for me to be able to grow my role. And, in the course of the negotiation for that, basically was made a director, even though I could have been brought in as a manager, because I said, is anyone going to be hired above me to lead this vertical? And when the answer was no, I said, okay, well, I should be made a director then, especially since I'm taking this large cut. And so that's what they gave me. And that was what set me up on a path to becoming an executive, within a few years. So know what you offer and ask for it, especially women of color. Just do it.
I love that. I love that. When you ask Rebecca, like a thing that you remember, what's your little nugget. And when I was choosing whether or not to do Imagine LA, I talked to my husband a bit that I said, this is going to impact them the most. And I asked my kids, and they both looked at me and said, Mommy, you've got to do it. You have to help the kids. And They didn't consult each other. They just looked at me and said that. And to this day, 16 years later, when I'm feeling down, I think about what they said. So I think when you hear something that resonates for you, stay with it.
Thank you. Boy, I wish we could stay with this, but the clock won't let us. So I really want to thank you all. Brian, it was great getting to know you. Jill and I have been able to work together for the past year, so I've gotten to know her already. And Becca and I go way back. It's been a whole maybe 5 years. So thank you all very much for your words of wisdom, right? That's what I like to think about, the wows that you have. So and showing that going through change, essentially, no matter what we want to call it, can be great and gratifying, whether kind of thrust upon us with the timing, as long as we actually tap into resources and all those around us. I think that's basically the theme that I've heard here is know thyself and use resources to get to know thyself and hear from others about how to do stuff. And as Brian said, just go for it. Don't be afraid. Just jump right in. So, although as Becca said too, just ask. There's another professor here, Zoe Chance, who just wrote a book on influence. And one of her things was sometimes you just have to ask. That's what'll get you there. So I appreciate it all. Thank you all very much.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks.
You.
Thank you.